Hey, hi everyone. My name is Pawan. If you have seen my previous videos, you would by now know that my purpose of recording these videos is to go over questions which uh, I see online being asked in different companies. Uh, I'm going to focus mostly on the front end part of it. Uh, and as part of this in video today, I'm going to cover a JavaScript question, which I saw being asked in a few companies, which is creating a promise. Uh, if you ask me, this is a pretty tough question. Uh, but let's discuss on how we would go about implementing this. So if you have used promises, you would know the different things that you would do when creating a promise, right? So you create a promise which accepts a function to which you can pass resolve and reject, right? The second thing that you can do is you can do chaining. So to the promise, I can have 10.data and I can do a console log of data, right? So I can chain this multiple times and keep doing this. I can do the same thing with errors, catch, and this is going to be error, and you can do a console.data. So this is chaining of errors. Now, what is the next thing you can do is there are static methods called resolve and reject. So you can create a promise just by doing a promise dot resolve, which internally creates a promise, and you can pass data to it. It just ensure it creates the promise inside for you and returns the promise. You can do the same thing with reject and pass some error to it or pass another promise to it. One important thing is when you are doing the chaining, remember that as part of the then, you can return a new promise over here. Right. So it is important that as part of then, which is if you have tried solving event emitters, it is just nothing but it is an array of handlers which is being pushed into it each time. But some of the handlers can be a promise themselves, and you have to resolve that as part of the chain before you move on to the next one. Cool. So now let's think of what are the states that we would have. So one of the the status is one of it, so which can have values like pending, fulfilled, and rejected. The next one is what is the data structure that we are maintaining for maintaining the chain of handles, handles which was passed as then and catch. Then and catch, which is resolve and reject, is a array which has got array of handler, uh, which we would visit as part of the execution and execute every single handler and flush it out, which is what we do with the then chain and catch chain, right? So now let's start implementing it. So as I said, we're going to maintain a status, and let's start with pending for now. The next thing is we are going to have handlers, which is going to be an array. Now this executor is nothing but this function over here, which accepts two values called resolve and reject, right? So we're going to do executor, and let's call resolve and reject. We will implement this, which is value, and reject, which is error, as part of the next code. One thing that we need to understand is similar to how we would have, how if you were using the React with the component approach, especially when you were adding event listeners, for all the event methods, you would rebind the context before calling it as part of the event methods. You would do the same thing over here so that both the resolve and reject, when they are called as part of the executor, have the appropriate context, which is the current context of the promise being passed to it. So even for the bind, let's just rebind the context. So what is resolve? So if this dot status is not equals to pending, just return. So what does this mean? This implies that the promise is either fulfilled or rejected. If it is either of it, we're just going to return and do nothing. This is what we would do even with reject. Now, as part of resolve, next thing we'll check is value that is passed to resolve. Is it a promise again? Is it an instance of a promise? Now, if it's instance of a promise, you're going to just execute the promise, call the then, and similar to how you did that with executor, you're going to rebind the resolve and reject and pass it to then. Very similar to the executor part. Now, if it's not an instance of the promise, here is where your main code comes in now. You're going to change the status to fulfilled, and you're going to store the result in an instance variable. And let's say result equals to value. What do you do with reject? You're going to do almost the same thing, but here you're going to set the status as rejected, and you're going to set the result with the error message. Right. Now let's go on to implementing then. So when you see over here, then, now if you think of it, what is the output of this function that you're passing as part of then? And what type of output it is? Now, if you realize this is nothing but a promise, right? So what we are now going to do is we are actually going to return a new instance of the promise that we are implementing as part of then, which accepts two values, which is resolve and reject. This is an important thing to think of, that what is then? It's nothing but returning a new promise. And now what we're going to do is add to the handlers. As part of then, we are going to push an object. Now, what is this object going to contain? It is going to contain two keys. The first key is going to be fulfilled, which is a function with value. And the next key is going to be rejected, which was the second state that we were maintaining as a second state value. And very similarly, this would return a function with error. Right? Now, what are you going to do over here as part of the fulfilled? So here, one important thing to check is if the type of on fulfilled is not equals to function, then you're just going to resolve with the value and return. You'll do the same thing over here for reject. You'll check if on rejected is not equals to function. You're just going to reject with the error. Now, in case if they are functions, so in case of resolve, you're going to call on fulfilled and pass it the value. Now, in case of reject, you're going to call resolve again, which is an important thing over here. You're not going to call the reject, you're going to call resolve, and I'll go over the reason why. And you're going to call on rejected and pass the error message to this. So this is basic fulfilled and rejected. Now, once we are done pushing this, what's the next thing that we are supposed to do once we are pushed into array? Is we have to execute all the handlers. So now let's implement what execute handlers is going to be. So first thing you have to check is the status. If the status is pending, we should not execute anything in this return. Now, if the status is not pending, what we're going to do is iterating each of the handler, and we are going to call the handler Now, what is handler? Handler is nothing but an object with two values, which is status and rejected. The status and rejected is the current status that we have stored as part of the resolve and reject to the instance variable. So we are going to look for the function which is either resolved, fulfilled, or rejected, and we are going to pass it the result which we stored in case of the resolve and reject. So which is this dot result. So all we are doing is we are executing the function. Not executing the function. We are iterating through the. We are looking into the object, checking for the key which is based on the status, and executing that function which is inside it by passing the result to it. Now, once we are done iterating all the arrays, we are going to make it empty so that we don't keep that in memory, and we release it so that we don't revisit the same handler twice. What is catch? All we are going to do is call then. As part of resolve, we are going to pass undefined, and as part of the reject, we are going to pass the unrejected value which was passed as part of cache. Now, I mentioned about the static methods. Now, if you think of the static methods, all it's doing is returning a new promise, which is it's returning a promise of your current promise that you are implementing. Resolve and reject are the two values to it, and you're just going to call resolve and pass value. We're going to do the same thing over here. Reject value. Cool. So now let's go over the code again. What did we do in the constructor? We maintained the status. We maintained an instance variable of handlers, and we called the executor by passing it the resolve and reject. The important thing in the code over here is we are going to check for any kinds of errors. So we are going to check for errors over here. If the executor had any issues, we're going to catch it. And if we catch it, we are going to call this dot reject with the error as part of the resolve. So we checked if it's not pending, return it. If not, check if it's a promise. If not, then set the status and the result. One important thing that we missed out over here is that once we are done resolving, we are supposed to execute the handlers again so that we revisit all of it, and then we start emptying any current handlers that we are holding. We do the same thing with reject. We checked if it's not pending. If yes, then return and maintain add the status and result and execute handlers. Now, as part of then, we return a new promise, push into the array an object which comprises of fulfilled and rejected. We checked if it's a function, and we called resolve. If it's not a function, we call resolve on fulfilled. Now, on fulfilled can have some kind of errors, right? So if we come across errors, we have to again wrap it with the try and catch. And if there is an error, what we're going to do is reject the error. As part of rejected, we did the same thing, and we called resolve. Now this will do the same try and catch, because on rejected can have error. So we want to catch it, and all we're going to do is reject error. This is an important point of how you implement the reject. Don't forget this part, and don't get confused here. You're calling resolve in reject, and you're catching it and calling reject after that. We call execute handlers. Execute handlers check for status. If it's pending, do nothing. If not, iterate through all the handlers, execute each of it based on the status and the data that we're storing. One important thing over here is this is supposed to be asynchronous. Our current code is doing it synchronous. So how do you make this asynchronous? That is, execute every single handler asynchronously. You can just wrap this with the set timeout by pushing it to the browser callback queue with a 0 and execute the handler inside it. Now, if you ask me, is this important? Probably not, but I see test cases for it. So better do that over here and call it within set timeout so that we're pushing this to the callback queue and we're executing as part of the next tick, so that it's not a sequential execution. We empty the handlers. We have added the catch, static methods, definition. Let's execute this and see if this works. And there were some test cases which failed, which said, no, we didn't return in the catch. My bad. Awesome. So this was creating a promise. If you ask me, this is a difficult question, but I hope this video does help you in thinking on how to implement this. I found this to be the simplest way of building promises, which handles all the test cases. Thank you very much, folks. And I'll keep posting videos for more such questions. Thank you.